After the defeat of Nazi Germany in 1945, the nation was initially divided into 4 occupation zones controlled by the United States, Soviet Union, Britain, and France. Berlin, though located deep within the Soviet zone, was similarly divided into 4 sectors. This arrangement, which was intended to be temporary, became permanent as tensions and suspicions between the Soviet Union and Western powers gradually escalated. By 1947, the economic differences between the occupation zones became increasingly apparent. Western zones began moving toward democratic governance and economic recovery, which was enabled by the Marshall Plan. This massive injection of aid from the United States totaled almost $13 billion, which was divided among European nations, creating the perfect conditions for West Germany's remarkable economic recovery during the post-war period. Under the leadership of Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, West Germany embraced free market principles and democratic institutions, leading to a period of rapid economic growth, which became known as the economic miracle. By the mid-1950s, West Germany had transformed from a war-ravaged nation into one of Europe's most prosperous democracies, with its citizens enjoying rising living standards, political freedoms, and growing international respect. Under Soviet control, East Germany was a stark contrast. The German Democratic Republic, established in 1949, found itself under the iron grip of the Socialist Unity Party, led by hardline Stalinist Walter Ulbricht. The Soviet Union's approach to its occupation zone differed markedly from the West. Instead of providing aid, the Soviets dismantled and shipped back to the USSR much of East Germany's industrial infrastructure as war reparations. The communist regime in East Germany implemented strict state planning and collectivization policies modelled on the Soviet system, leading to widespread economic inefficiencies and shortages of basic consumer goods. The East German government's control extended far beyond economic matters. The Ministry for State Security, commonly known as the Stasi, developed into one of the most sophisticated and pervasive surveillance organizations in history. With approximately 1 informant for every 6.5 citizens, the Stasi created an atmosphere of constant surveillance and fear. Citizens could never be certain who might be reporting their activities to the authorities. Friends, colleagues, even family members could be secret government informants. This oppressive system of control reached into every aspect of daily life, from school and employment to private conversations and even personal relationships. In June 1953, the mounting pressures of life under communist rule led to the first major challenge to Soviet control in Berlin. East German workers launched a series of strikes and protests against increased production quotas and the decline in living conditions. The protests quickly spread across the country, with demonstrators demanding free elections and German reunification. The Soviet response was swift and brutal as Soviet tanks rolled into East Berlin, crushing the uprising and leaving scores dead or wounded. This violent suppression served as a clear message about the limits of reform and the reality of Soviet power, but it also deepened the population's disillusionment with the communist system in East Germany. By 1958, the contrast between East and West Berlin had become impossible to ignore. West Berlin stood as a gleaming showcase of Western prosperity and freedom, with modern buildings, well-stocked shops, and vibrant cultural life. Eastern Berlin, despite being the capital of the GDR, struggled with chronic shortages, crumbling infrastructure, and political repression. This divide turned Berlin into both a powerful symbol of Cold War competition and a dangerous weak point in the Iron Curtain. The city's unique status as a divided metropolis deep within East German territory made it the perfect escape route for those seeking to flee to the west. The refugee crisis that emerged threatened the very existence of East Germany. By 1958, more than 3 million East Germans, over 1/6 of the total population, had fled to the west through Berlin. This exodus included a disproportionate number of young, educated professionals such as doctors, engineers, teachers, skilled workers, and other specialists whose skills were crucial for economic development. The so-called brain drain created a devastating cycle. As skilled workers left, the economy suffered further, prompting even more people to flee. Some days saw thousands of refugees crossing the border, with a record of 40,000 people fleeing in a single day during August of 1961. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev recognized that this situation posed an existential threat, not just to East Germany, but to the entire Soviet position in Eastern Europe. The steady stream of refugees choosing Western capitalism over Eastern communism created a propaganda disaster that undermined Soviet claims of communist superiority. In November 1958, Khrushchev made an announcement that would have serious consequences for the city, stating that the Western Allies should abandon their plans for the reunification of Germany and officially recognize East Germany as an independent nation. The Western powers refused and remained hopeful that in the future, all political differences and military tensions could be overcome so that Germany could be reborn as a single unified nation. On November 27th, Khrushchev launched a diplomatic offensive with his Berlin Ultimatum. He demanded the complete demilitarization of West Berlin, the withdrawal of all Western military forces, and the conversion of Berlin into a free city with neutral status. Khrushchev allowed just 6 months for the West to fulfill his demands, or he would hand over official control of all routes into Berlin to the East German government, effectively sealing off the city from any outside assistance. This was an intelligent piece of statecraft, as by sealing off the city, the West would be forced to negotiate with the East German government. Therefore, they would be forced to officially recognize their authority as a legitimate nation. The West viewed this as further evidence of the Soviet Union spreading communism throughout Europe, while Khrushchev saw it as a vital step to prevent the mass exodus of skilled workers fleeing to the West. The arms race provided both superpowers with huge arsenals of nuclear weapons by 1958, and the Berlin crisis could easily have led to nuclear war. However, both sides sought to compromise, and between 1959 and 1961, a series of summit meetings were held to find a solution. In May 1959, the Geneva summit brought foreign ministers together in neutral Switzerland. However, talks ended in deadlock, with neither side able to agree on proposals for the governance of Berlin. In September 1959, both sides met again at Camp David in the United States, as Dwight Eisenhower and Nikita Khrushchev met in person for the first time. Their meeting was a step forward, as Khrushchev withdrew his ultimatum and both sides agreed to further talks. The Paris summit of 1960 collapsed before it began due to an international incident which significantly heightened tensions. On the 1st of May, the Soviets shot down an American U-2 spy plane piloted by France's Gary Powers while conducting high-altitude reconnaissance over Soviet territory. The incident became a diplomatic nightmare for President Eisenhower, who initially tried to claim the aircraft was a weather research plane that had strayed off course. This cover story quickly unraveled when the Soviets revealed they had captured Powers alive, along with surveillance equipment and photographs. Eisenhower had been outmaneuvered by Khrushchev, and the United States was publicly proven to be dishonest, which was a major propaganda victory for the Soviet Union. When Eisenhower suggested that reconnaissance missions were unavoidable in such uncertain times and refused to apologize, Khrushchev pulled out of the Paris summit without reaching any agreements over the future of Berlin. The final major diplomatic effort came at the Vienna summit in June 1961, where the newly elected President John F. Kennedy faced off against Khrushchev. The Soviet leader was emboldened by Kennedy's recent failure in the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba and saw the young president as inexperienced and took an aggressive stance, renewing his demands over the issue of Berlin. Kennedy, determined not to appear weak, refused to yield, and the meeting ended with increased tensions and both sides preparing for a possible military confrontation. In the aftermath of the Vienna summit, Kennedy approved increased military funding by $2 billion in preparation. As diplomatic efforts failed and tensions mounted, the refugee crisis reached a critical point. The increasing possibility of Western access to East Berlin being cut off led to a surge in escape attempts, with thousands of East Germans fleeing the city every day. Under pressure from the East German leader Walter Ulbricht, Khrushchev authorized the construction of what would become the Berlin Wall. The operation, codenamed Rose, began on the night of August 12, 1961, as East German soldiers and engineers began sealing off the border between East and West Berlin with barbed wire and temporary barriers. The initial construction caught many by surprise, including Western intelligence services, who were powerless to do anything to prevent the division and isolation of the city. What began as a hasty barrier of barbed wire and guards evolved into one of the most sophisticated and deadly border systems ever created. The final version was a complex system of armed observation towers and parallel concrete walls, with the infamous death strip running between them. This was an area filled with obstacles and tripwires that was continuously patrolled by soldiers with tracker dogs. Armed guards received orders of shoot to kill, while powerful searchlights illuminated any attempted crossings at night. The wall stretched for 165 kilometers, completely encircling Berlin and cutting through the heart of the once unified city. The human impact of the wall's construction was immediate and devastating. Families found themselves suddenly separated, workers were cut off from their jobs, and entire communities became divided without consent. The wall cut through 192 streets and separated 12 subway lines. Children could no longer visit grandparents, spouses were separated, and long-standing social and economic connections were severed overnight. The psychological impact was profound as Berliners faced the reality that they were now effectively prisoners in their own country. Over the wall's 28-year history, approximately 5,000 people managed successful escapes to the west, often demonstrating remarkable ingenuity and courage. People fled through tunnels, flew in homemade hot air balloons, drove through checkpoints in modified vehicles, and even zip-lined from buildings near the wall. However, more than 130 people lost their lives attempting to cross, though the exact number remains disputed. The most infamous incident occurred in August 1962, when 18-year-old Peter Fechter was shot while attempting to climb the wall. Fechter fell back onto the eastern side and lay dying for 45 minutes in full view of Western media and horrified onlookers who shouted "murderers" across the border zone as Peter Fechter became one of the most powerful symbols of the Berlin Wall's brutality. For the Soviet Union, the Berlin Wall had successfully stopped the refugee exodus and stabilized the East German economy, but represented a significant propaganda defeat that revealed the fundamental weaknesses of the communist system. The West, while unable to prevent the wall's construction, turned West Berlin into a powerful symbol of freedom and resistance to communism. During President Kennedy's 1963 visit to West Berlin, he famously declared, "Ich bin ein Berliner," demonstrating Western resolve and solidarity with the residents of the divided city. The Berlin Wall became one of the most potent physical symbols of the Cold War, representing the Iron Curtain that Winston Churchill had warned about in his famous 1946 speech in Fulton. The wall led Khrushchev to abandon his plan to unite all of Germany under his control, as the refugee crisis seemed to confirm that the citizens of Berlin preferred capitalist governance, and the wall became a means to trap Berliners under communism. That said, the wall also prevented the exodus of important workers fleeing to the west and allowed the economy of Eastern Berlin to stabilize, all the while demonstrating to the West that the Soviet Union would not back down. For the United States, the Berlin Wall posed significant problems, as it was erected without US approval, and Berliners who wanted to flee to the West were now trapped under communist rule. However, the wall also highlighted that Khrushchev had to accept that Kennedy and the Western powers were also not going to back down, and that West Berlin had become a powerful symbol of hope and defiance to the communist occupation of Europe. The wall provided a temporary solution to the immediate crisis of 1961, but its human cost and symbolic power shaped world events until its dramatic fall in 1989. Today, preserved sections of the wall and numerous memorials throughout Berlin serve as a testament to the destructive power of ideological division and the ultimate triumph of freedom over oppression.